Have you ever had the feeling that someone was influencing you without you even realizing it? Not in an obvious way, but subtly, through words, behavior, or emotion. The truth is, manipulation isn't always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and almost invisible. It can happen in relationships, at work, or even through the content you consume every day. And most of the time, people don't even notice it's happening. In this video, we're going to explore what dark psychology really is, how these tactics work, and why understanding them might be more important than you think. Because once you start seeing these patterns, you can't unsee them. So what exactly is dark psychology? At its core, dark psychology refers to the use of psychological principles to manipulate, influence, or control other people, often for personal gain, and often without their awareness. It's not a formal branch of psychology you'll find in textbooks, but rather a collection of behaviors and tactics drawn from how the human mind works. To understand it better, think of psychology as a tool. On one side, it's used to help people in therapy, communication, and understanding human behavior. But on the other side, the same knowledge can be used in a very different way. Instead of helping, it can be used to exploit. Dark psychology focuses on that side, the side where people use emotions, trust, fear, and perception as tools. It includes things like manipulation, deception, persuasion, and control. Not always in obvious ways, but often in subtle, calculated steps that slowly influence how someone thinks or behaves. What makes it powerful is that it works with natural human tendencies. We trust people who seem confident. We respond to authority. We look for approval. And we often avoid conflict. These are normal traits. But in the wrong hands, they can be used against us. It's also important to understand that dark psychology isn't always extreme or dramatic. It doesn't always look like something from a movie. In many cases, it shows up in everyday situations. A conversation that makes you doubt yourself, someone using guilt to get their way, or subtle pressure that pushes you into decisions you didn't fully choose. In this series, we're not just going to define these ideas, we're going to break them down step by step so you can recognize them in real life. Because once you understand how these tactics work, you're no longer reacting blindly. You're aware, and that awareness changes everything. Why does any of this actually matter? Because these patterns aren't rare. They're part of everyday life, woven into conversations, decisions, and interactions you experience constantly. Most people assume influence is something obvious, something you can easily detect. But in reality, the most effective forms are the ones you don't notice at all. Consider how often choices feel like your own, yet are subtly shaped by external pressure. A suggestion framed in a certain way, a tone that creates urgency, or even silence used at the right moment. All of these can shift outcomes without drawing attention. It's not about force, it's about quiet direction. This becomes even more significant when trust is involved. The closer someone is to you, the less likely you are to question their intentions. That's what makes certain situations complicated. Influence coming from a distance is easier to recognize. But when it comes from someone familiar, it often feels natural, even justified. Another layer to this is how easily perception can be altered. People don't just respond to facts. They respond to how those facts are presented. Change the framing, and the reaction changes. Over time, repeated exposure to certain ideas can reshape the beliefs, making something seem normal, acceptable, or even necessary. In professional environments, these dynamics can determine opportunities, decisions, and outcomes. In personal connections, they can affect confidence, boundaries, and emotional stability. And in a broader sense, they play a role in how groups think, follow, and react. What makes all of this important isn't just the existence of these patterns. It's the lack of awareness around them. When something goes unnoticed, it becomes more powerful. When it's understood, it becomes easier to question. That's the real reason this matters, not to create suspicion, but to develop clarity. Because once you begin to recognize how influence operates beneath the surface, you start making decisions with intention instead of impulse, and that shift changes everything. To really understand this subject, it helps to break it down into its main areas, because what we're talking about isn't a single idea. It's a combination of different patterns that all connect in subtle ways. One of the most important concepts revolves around certain personality traits that are strongly linked to calculated behavior. These traits are often grouped together because they share a common theme, a focus on personal gain, often without concern for others. Some individuals rely on charm and self-importance. Others operate through cold decision-making, and some focus on long-term strategy and control. Each approach is different, but the outcome is often the same: influence without transparency. Another area involves techniques that shape how people think and respond. This includes methods built around language, timing, and emotional cues. A simple shift in wording can change how something feels. A well-placed pause can create pressure. Even mirroring someone's behavior can build a sense of familiarity that isn't entirely genuine. These techniques don't force decisions, they guide them. There's also a category focused on emotional influence. This is where feelings like guilt, fear, or obligation are used to steer behavior. Instead of direct control, it works by creating internal conflict. A person might feel responsible, uncertain, or hesitant, and those emotions become the driving force behind their actions. Another key part involves distortion of perception. This is where someone's understanding of a situation is gradually altered. It doesn't happen instantly. It builds over time. Small shifts, repeated patterns, subtle contradictions, until the original perspective becomes unclear. At that point, it becomes much easier to redirect someone's thinking. And then there's the role of environment and social dynamics. People are heavily influenced by what others are doing, what seems acceptable, and what feels normal in a group setting. When these factors are controlled or manipulated, they can create powerful pressure without a single word being said directly. Each of these areas works in its own way, but they often overlap. That's what makes them effective. They don't rely on one method. They combine multiple layers of influence at the same time. As we move forward, each of these will be explored in detail, so you can start recognizing how they appear in real situations, not just in theory, but in everyday life. Understanding these concepts becomes much clearer when you look at how they play out in real situations. Because this isn't something limited to theory, it shows up in everyday life, often in ways that feel completely normal at first. Take personal relationships, for example. There are situations where someone creates a strong emotional connection very quickly. Attention, compliments, constant communication. It feels intense, even genuine. But over time, that same energy can shift. The attention becomes inconsistent. The tone changes. And suddenly the other person is left trying to regain what was there in the beginning. This creates a cycle where one side is always seeking approval, without realizing how that dynamic was built. In professional settings, the patterns can look different, but operate in a similar way. A colleague or superior might present ideas in a way that subtly pressures agreement, not through force, but through positioning. They might emphasize urgency, highlight authority, or frame a decision so that disagreement feels uncomfortable. On the surface, everything appears reasonable, but the direction of the outcome has already been shaped. Media and online platforms are another space where these principles are constantly in use. Information isn't just shared, it's structured. The way something is presented can influence how it's perceived. Headlines, visuals, repetition. All of these elements guide attention and create certain reactions. Over time, this can affect opinions, preferences, and even beliefs, often without conscious awareness. Social environments add another layer. People tend to adjust based on what others around them are doing. When a behavior appears common or accepted, it becomes easier to follow, even if it wasn't something you originally agreed with. This kind of influence doesn't require direct interaction. It works through observation and subtle pressure. What's important to notice is that none of these situations feel extreme in the moment. They unfold gradually, blending into normal interactions. That's what makes them effective. There's no clear starting point, and often no obvious signal that something is off. Once you begin to recognize these patterns, you start to see how often they appear in conversations, decisions, and environments you encounter every day. And that awareness is where everything begins to shift. So, once you understand how these patterns work, the next question becomes, how do you deal with them? The first step is awareness, but not in an exaggerated or paranoid way. It's about paying closer attention to how certain interactions make you feel. If something consistently leaves you confused, pressured, or uncertain about your own judgment, that's worth noticing. Your reactions often signal more than the situation itself. Another important factor is slowing things down. Many forms of influence rely on speed, quick decisions, immediate responses, or emotional reactions. When you give yourself time to think, you create space between the stimulus and your response. That space makes it much harder for anyone to quietly guide your choices. Clarity also plays a key role. When you're clear about your own boundaries, values, and priorities, it becomes more difficult for someone else to shift them without you noticing. Uncertainty creates openings. The more defined your position is, the less flexible it becomes under pressure. It's also useful to observe patterns instead of isolated moments. A single interaction might not reveal much, but repeated behavior tells a different story. Consistency in tone, actions, or outcomes often exposes underlying intent more clearly than any one situation. Another layer is emotional control. Influence often works by triggering strong feelings, urgency, guilt, fear, or excitement. When emotions take over, logical thinking tends to step back. Learning to recognize when you're reacting emotionally and taking a moment before responding can prevent decisions that don't fully align with your own thinking. And finally, questioning is powerful. Not in a confrontational way, but internally, asking yourself simple things like, why am I agreeing to this? Or, would I make the same decision without this pressure? Can bring clarity very quickly. None of this is about avoiding people or becoming overly cautious. It's about understanding how influence operates, so you can respond with intention rather than impulse. Because once you develop that level of awareness, you're no longer easily directed. You're choosing consciously and on your own terms. Now, at this point, you might be starting to see things a little differently. The way conversations unfold, the way decisions are shaped, even the way certain situations feel, it all starts to connect once you understand what's happening beneath the surface. And this is just the beginning. In the next videos, we're going to break these ideas down even further. Step by step, you'll see how specific patterns work, how they show up in real situations, and how to recognize them early before they start influencing your thinking without you realizing it. Because the goal here isn't just knowledge, it's awareness that you can actually use in your everyday life. So, if this is something you want to understand on a deeper level, make sure you're following along. There's a lot more to uncover, and each video will build on the last. And if any part of this made you pause and think, or reminded you of something you've experienced, feel free to share it. Different perspectives add a lot to these discussions. For now, just keep one thing in mind. Once you start noticing these patterns, they don't disappear. You just become better at seeing them, and that changes how you respond to everything.